against the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry that I'd been subjected to wasn't really a good idea, and that it was completely out of alignment with Unitarian Universalist principles and purposes and so on, and that the correct thing to do was to hold Reverend Ray Drennan responsible for his anti-religious intolerance and bigotry, and do the same perhaps in terms of Frank Green and some of the other atheist bigots in the Unitarian Church of Montreal. But of course that didn't happen, because this was all about a carefully orchestrated move by leadership to just get me out of the church and hopefully shut down my protest. Well, that didn't happen. So November 22nd of 1999, they held their special congregational meeting, which, by the way, I was invited to, but they gave me a very limited amount of time to present a so-called defense. This was basically a kangaroo court. This is, not, you're basically guilty until proven innocent and so on. I had an opportunity of about half an hour to prove my innocence, whereas they'd had, 18 months worth of sounding out people and lobbying them, 2 informational meetings, again, basically lobbying people. Oh dear, I hope he doesn't, okay. Got this Doberman who's looking about to have a dump. Okay, no worries. Just didn't want him pissing on my signs if it came down to it. Which quite frankly is, I should say that as far as dogs pissing on my picket signs go, it's been quite miraculous. In the whole, pretty well now 18 plus years of protesting outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal, there's been only one occasion where a dog has peed on my picket signs. And then it was quite ironic, because he peed on one of the picket signs that spoke about abusive Unitarian Universalist clergy. So it was almost as if he was expressing his displeasure with the abusive Unitarian Universalist clergy, as it were. So anyway, yeah, we're just giving a little bit of a history lesson here. A Robin Edgar version of Unitarian Church of Montreal history that's totally truthful and supported by documentary evidence and other evidence. There's nothing I've said that cannot be verified, to the best of my knowledge, or only a small amount of what I've said so far might not have documentary evidence to support it. But, everything I spoke about in terms of the, informational meetings and the special congregational meeting and so on to throw me out of church, and the temporary expulsions, this is all documented with letters and so on. Announcements in the church newsletter and even newspaper articles and so on. So I did manage to get a certain amount of press. So we're going to start displaying picket signs. You got some picket signs set up here, the freestanding ones. Unitarian Universalist perversion of justice sucks you after you. Unitarian Universalist misuse blasphemy law to cover up and deny pedophilia and rape. This is a comparatively recent development in the fiasco, as it were. The Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations in Boston, that is the head office of Unitarian Universalism in North America, the Vatican of Unitarian Universalism, as it were, hired Stikeman Elliott barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe, to falsely accuse me of the archaic criminal act of blasphemous libel in Bill Cosby-style legal bullying that was clearly intended to cover up and hide the fact that certain Unitarian Universalist ministers are, in fact, guilty of engaging in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. I had blogged about a few cases of pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalists on the Emerson Avenger blog, and I guess the Unitarian Universalist Association wanted those blog posts to disappear, and so they thought it'd be a really good idea to hire this corporate lawyer who specializes in defamation to accuse me of blasphemous libel and a few other things that are pretty much as ludicrous, in an effort to intimidate me into removing the blog post about pedophiles and rapists. Of course that didn't happen because my blog posts were by no means unfound and vicious, as Stikeman Elliott, barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, represented in his immoral, unethical, borderline criminal, and quite frankly batshit crazy cease and desist demand letter, the first one I received. I received a follow-up letter when I informed Maitre Coulombe that I was having considerable difficulty finding blog posts that matched his description of unfound and vicious allegations, the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, because he had not identified him in his initial cease and desist demand letter. He just spoken in those general terms. And so I asked him to please properly identify which blog posts he was talking about, knowing full well that they were not unfounded. You know, the blog post in which I spoke about Unitarian Universalists who'd been charged, tried, and convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, and whose despicable crimes had been reported in credible professional news sources, newspapers and so on. You know, clearly these were not unfounded. These were cases where people had actually been convicted of crimes and sentenced to jail terms for committing them. So I asked Maitre Coulombe to provide titles of the blog posts in question. And if he couldn't do that, to provide the URL, that is the internet address, or at least provide the date, you know, so I could find them. And, you know, go and look at them, you know, reread them. Of course, I knew which ones they were, and I'd already reread them. But essentially, I was saying, you know, show me what you're talking about here. Let me know exactly which ones are unfounded and vicious and constitute the criminal act of blasphemous libel, you know, and I'll decide how I'm going to govern myself. Because, you know, down at the bottom of the letter it says, do govern yourself accordingly. Now, of course, what that means is do obey what I say. You know, that's really what it means. It means, like, do remove the blog post, or you will be charged with the criminal act of blasphemous libel and possibly sentenced to a 2-year jail term for committing blasphemous libel, assuming you're convicted of this archaic crime that hasn't been prosecuted since the 1930s. I mean, it didn't say that in the letter, but this is the essence of what that do govern yourself accordingly is all about. So instead of properly identifying the blog posts in question, as I'd asked him to do, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe wrote a second arrogant and aggressive cease and desist demand letter, in which he said, and this is pretty much an exact quote, it might be slightly off, but this is the essence, and it's using, you know, some of his exact words. Your claims not to be able to find the offending material are not credible, blah, 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 blah. Go find the blog post yourself. Now, he didn't say go find the blog post yourself, but that was the upshot of what he said. He basically said, you're a liar, you know where the blog posts are, I'm not going to identify them for you because you know where they are. That's essentially what that was all about. He's basically saying, you know, when you're saying your claims not to be able to find the offending material are not credible, he's saying, you know, you're a liar when you tell me that you can't find blog posts that match my description of unfound and vicious, blah, 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 blah. So I had to write back to Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe and say, no, you don't quite understand what I said. I said I can't find blog posts that match your description of unfounded and vicious, blah, 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 blah. You know, my blog posts about pedophiles and rapists, which I know where they are, as I just mentioned in this video, not to confuse in terms of him, blog posts about Unitarian Universalists who were actually charged, tried, and convicted and went to jail, and these, you know, cases of pedophilia and or rape were reported in newspapers. There's nothing remotely unfounded about that. And as far as them being vicious goes, well, not really. They're pretty just matter-of-fact, you know, blog posts. So that was the last I ever heard from Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe. And I made it very, very clear to him in my responses, my initial responses, that I expected him and his clients to formally withdraw their false accusations, publicly apologize for their false accusations, and tell the truth about just how many Unitarian Universalist ministers, to say nothing of Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, are guilty of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. And guess what? They haven't done it yet. You know, this was in June of 2012. It was Friday, June 1st of 2012, when I found a email in my inbox from Maitre Marc-André Coulombe, which had a PDF file attached to it of a paper document that I was later served with by a bailiff, which contained the blasphemous libel accusation and a couple of other ludicrous accusations. You know, almost immediately, well, not immediately. I think my first response, I didn't ask for retraction or apology or so on, because I was basically trying to get the guy to come back, you know, with specifically, you know, what he was claiming was blasphemous libel and so on. You know, I wanted him to properly identify the blog post so that I could then come back and say, well, hey, guess what? You know, it says right in the title the guy was convicted. You know, didn't you bother to check to see if the guy was convicted? You know, in one case, you know, well, in both cases I named the person. So didn't you run a search to see whether or not these people were actually convicted of pedophilia and rape and so on? You know, like basically show him what a fool he was to try to pretend that my blog posts were unfounded and vicious, but instead, you know, he comes back with this idiotic response, pretending that my claim not to be able to find unfounded and vicious blog posts about Unitarian Universalist pedophiles and rapists was not credible. So it was in the responses to that second email and second letter that was eventually provided. I wasn't actually, the second one was not served on me by bailiff. It was actually handed to me by employee of Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors when I went to collect it from them directly. So that's